Okay, welcome everyone. Thursday, November 17th, 2:30 in the afternoon. 2022. Welcome. Just going to go through our normal introductory stuff, and then we'll turn it over to Lauren and Anna. We've got a nice presentation today. Hopefully we'll have another lively discussion. We are recording, and these recordings are available. I'm going to review the website where those are available again today, just so everyone is aware of that. Here it is. I'll show a little more detail a little later about it, but there's a lot of different materials in here, not only these recordings, but other materials available, guidance materials, previous workshop recordings, conference presentations, and so on. These meetings are every third Thursday of the month, 2:30 in the afternoon to 3:30. The Zoom link is always the same, so keep that for your records if you like. I do send out the reminders 1 week prior and then the day of. Please let me know if you have anyone that you would like to be added to the distribution list, and I'll put them on there so that they get those reminders as well as others. Just as a reminder, the folks that are attending these meetings include people in groups that are working in the Delaware River Watershed Initiative, as well as folks that are just working in the Delaware Basin but are not directly associated with the DRWI. And then we have a few folks that are attending from outside the DRB. The Stroud Center is able to provide these meetings and overall support for monitoring and EnviroDIY support in the Delaware River Basin via the Delaware River Watershed Initiative, and in Pennsylvania via Seesaw. This is the website for the Delaware River Watershed Initiative, 4 states, 1 source. EnviroDIY and the DRB, this stuff we talk about here, is a small component of DRWI overall. And then the Consortium for Scientific Assistance to Watersheds is an option available to, especially to groups working in Pennsylvania, well, only in Pennsylvania, that are not necessarily associated with DRWI. So that's an option if you're a group in that category. Just moving on to this general goals for these meetings. This is really a time for us to check in, to bring up issues, to talk about, ecological questions as well as technology questions. We do provide updates centered on those types of issues. And we generally have presentations either from a Stroud Center presenter or from a group doing interesting work. Today, that's going to be Willistown Conservation Trust and Darby Creek Valley Association. So facilitators for these meetings, myself, Rachel Johnson. Rachel's not on today. She had other commitments. Krista Reeves and Shannon Hicks. And Elena is supporting Rachel out in the field. Carol Armstrong and George Seeds are master watershed stewards who are available to mentor folks and are kind of just working overall with master watershed stewards facilitating EnviroDIY. DRWI leads at the Stroud include John Jackson, Matt Earhart, and Dave Arscott. So from the Stroud perspective regarding EnviroDIY in the Delaware River Basin, our primary goal continues to be to try to support station owners and managers and the volunteers supporting the stations and using those stations for their own purposes. In support of that goal, we are doing analysis of the basin-wide data set and developing different tools to help characterize the watersheds and put the data in context so that it can be communicated to the public and to local stakeholders. So general format of these meetings: introduction, updates, presentation, discussion, and conclusion. Today, as I mentioned, we have the Darby Creek Headwaters Monitoring Project and Salt Snapshot projects that the Willistown Conservation Trust and Darby Creek Valley Association, that Watershed should not be in there, I got that wrong, Darby Creek Valley Association, DCVA, have been working on collaboratively. So now I'll just go through a few updates here. This is same as last month. Fall weather means lots of leaves in the water and turbidity fouling, possibly a little more fouling of CTD sensors as well. So if you have wacky data, just know that it could be just, you know, fouling that needs to be dealt with. Power issues with leaves still being on the trees, although that's not quite the case anymore. So you should be, if you've been having battery problems due to leaves on trees and lower light, those leaves falling off should help some battery issues. Now, letting more light in for the solar panels. Rachel is still out collecting grab samples from across the DRB. She's finishing that up. These are samples that for just new sites, new stations that have gone out in 2022. So if you had a new station and have any questions about that or anything, feel free to be in touch. Again, these snapshots that folks are doing, Lauren's going to talk about one they did recently. Folks seem to be finding them useful. So if you'd like some assistance in doing that or just kind of organizing whatever, that we do have a protocol, but there's lots of different ways you can do it. This is sort of just one method. So feel free to be in touch with the Stroud Center with me, and we can help you along with that. Last month, we talked about the idea of how do we deal with following up on questions from these meetings. We discussed it internally and thought that a good approach really would probably be at least to try out posting these questions to manage my watershed. This is one of the, this is the newest of the Wiki Watershed tool in the Wiki Watershed toolkit. So it's simply managemywatershed.org. It is a separate login. So you're going to need to set up a separate login with username and password. Just if you do that, just make sure to save your account information so that you can get in there. In order to post questions or answer questions, you need to actually log in. But there is a Q&A forum. So I think what we'd like folks to do is just, if you have a question, whether it's in relation to this, you know, content of one of these meetings, or whether it's with regard to a recent workshop or whatever else, your recent field work or recent data analysis, or just a general ecology question, whatever. I think we'd like to encourage folks to post those questions in here. And hopefully it's you know, logging in and such isn't too much of an obstacle that is going to prevent people from going and accessing this easily and really having a good question and answer type dialogue in here. So please keep that in mind if you have general questions. If we have any prominent questions from today, then maybe we'll try to go in and post those and see what we can do for getting some good answers in there for those, and possibly follow-up questions. Okay, so here's the idea. You're just going to have a title, and then you're just going to put your question in there, and then folks will be able to respond. There's also a tools section in Manage My Watershed that I wanted to mention. These are tools such as USGS Stream Stats, the Water Data Collaborative, Water Reporter, that are just good resources for people to know about. So I would like to encourage anyone who is attending today that has ideas for good tools that they know of that others may be interested in, to post those here and provide an explanation of its utility and why it's been useful for you, why it may be useful to others, so on. Okay. I also wanted to point out, as I mentioned, some of these general resources that we have, the EnviroDIY manual, which is we're referring to it as a knowledge base. It is under the Mayfly tab at EnviroDIY.org. And you see here at the bottom, it's this monitoring station manual and appendices. And then when it's open, you have all of these different tabs that you can go to different sections of the manual. And then there's all these different appendices. So there's a lot of information in there, and it's fairly easy to search. You can just search the whole manual right here. So feel free to make use of that. And this is the wikiwatershed.org/DRWI page. You can access this with this direct link, or you can just go to wikiwatershed.org and click on the DRWI tab. This has a lot of different resources. As I mentioned, there's a lot of stuff below these. These are shortcuts. So you've got your field visit data, where your field visit data sheets can be entered, and you can access historic entries there. There's a lot of different monitoring help resources. There's salt monitoring resources, data visualization, which is Monitor My Watershed associated resources, and so on. And then there's links to all these different, here's our monthly meetings, and then there's different workshops and conferences. And then these are a lot of the Watershed 101 and 102 workshops that we did a number of years ago. Okay, so any questions at this point before we move on? All good? Okay. So today we have Lauren McGrath, Anna Willig, and Aurora Deisel, who are going to be presenting on their Darby Creek Headwaters Monitoring Project. And I think they're going to be focusing on the recent salt snapshot that they did in the watershed. So with that, I will stop share and pass it off to Lauren to share and begin the presentation.
All right, great. Can everyone see the screen okay?
Looks
wonderful. Well, thanks, Dave, and thanks for having us. We're excited to be here. So I'm Lauren McGrath. I'm the director of the Watershed Protection Program at Willistown Conservation Trust.
And I'm Anna Willig. I'm a research and data specialist at the Watershed Protection Program.
So together we are the Watershed Protection Program, which is a lot of fun. So Willistown Conservation Trust is a small land trust in eastern Chester County. And we have been partnered with the Darby Creek Valley Association since 2021 to do a community science monitoring project throughout the entire Darby-Cobbs watershed. So for the sake of this talk, whenever we refer to Darby Creek, we do also mean the Cobbs watershed as part of the entire catchment. So this is truly and wonderfully a real collaborative project, and it started that way. So Willistown Conservation Trust monitors on a monthly basis in the headwaters of Ridley Crum, and we have one site in the Darby Creek watershed. And we started talking to our friends over at DCVA and realized that if we work together, we could both expand our understanding of what's happening in the watershed and help to educate further about how citizens, community members in the watershed can be making a direct difference through monitoring and targeted restoration practices. So with guidance from Stroud Water Research Center, we kicked off this community science monitoring program. And then just a couple weeks ago, we did our first snapshot, and this was supported wonderfully by the Upper Mainline YMCA, who provided access to their watershed lab, which is part of their Artisan Village, which is this great new component, education component that they have on their campus. So they provided the space for us to gather in the Darby Creek watershed to analyze and go over the data set. So The Darby Creek Community Science program kicked off in 2021 after a 1-year delay. It was supposed to roll out in April 2020, but for obvious reasons got pushed back. And the goal of this was to really get a better understanding of what's happening throughout the watershed. So we have been training volunteers since 2021. We equip them with all of the supplies they need to go out to sites that have been identified by Aurora, Anna, and I, and collect water quality parameters. So volunteers go through a pretty intensive training, and we do our best to teach stream ecology 3 different ways. So there's one-on-one trainings where you learn about the basics of stream ecology. There is a site visit where the volunteer runs all of the data collection, and we're just present for support and questions. There are online video tutorials, and we have written protocols that we provide every volunteer. So it's a pretty intensive training, but a lot of fun. We've had awesome success and an incredible community that's grown out of this volunteer program. So when we have our volunteers go out into the stream, we ask them to collect data on stream water temperature, pH, chlorides, conductivity, and then a ton of qualitative data. So assessing the stream substrate, erosion levels, water conditions, riparian buffer conditions. And then everyone collects site images every time they visit their site. And that has been helping us do a lot of quality control work, assessing, how are they looking at the riparian areas? How are they looking at water quality or water conditions? And then we always have the volunteers take pictures of the Quantab strips that we use for our chloride analysis and our pH strips. And this has been really awesome, a good way to build trust and confidence on both sides of the community science process. So this is a high frequency monitoring program. So our volunteers go out every 4 weeks. So that's 13 times a year. And they have a 4-day window to go out and do their sampling. And we did this intentionally. Both the high frequency, because we have a lot of small tributaries and very quickly changing conditions. The Darby Cobbs is not a huge watershed. So we want to be able to capture those seasonal variations in detail. And a 4-day window gives flexibility for our volunteers who have a variety of employment status. We have some folks who are retired, some folks who are working parents. So we know that providing a longer range of time provides more opportunities for them to get out every 4 weeks to collect the data. And one thing that I want to give a huge shout out to Aurora for, she has been picking a lot of the sites and helping coordinate with volunteers to locate those sites near their homes to try and remove that major hurdle of travel when it comes to community science work. So this has been a really rewarding process. We have learned so much already. There have been trends showing urban karst situations in some of our streams. There have been really delightfully high quality surprises, which is always good to see. But we do notice that there are some issues with our study design. So like I said, that 4-day sampling window every 4 weeks is awesome for our volunteers, but it introduces some variability and noise in the data set. Particularly, we have some volunteers who consistently go out on, we run from Thursday to Sunday. So we have folks who usually go out on Thursdays and folks who typically go out on Sundays. And so if there's a weather event between those 2 sample collection periods in the watershed, then we do see some variations between what could be a very cohesive story. So it's something we've flagged, we're aware of, but it's just part of trying to make this a community science driven effort. We have an incredible team of volunteers, and Charlie is on the call, I saw, and feel free to jump in. This is your experience too, but we love our volunteers. They're incredible, but it's very energy intensive. As I outlined, there's multiple training processes that we go through. There's a lot of energy that goes into creating these excellent volunteers. So it slows our rate of expansion throughout the watershed to add additional sites. And we do capture some wonderful seasonal variation across a huge geographic area, but it takes a lot of time and energy to create new sites and to cultivate new volunteers. So for all of the incredible benefits of this program, there are a lot of drawbacks. So when we started talking to Dave about the snapshot framework that's being done, it seemed to address all of the issues that we've been seeing with our data set. So we were really excited for the opportunity to try and create a snapshot experience for our community, and to collect a baseline understanding of what's happening in a lot of these small tributaries that are, potentially point source contamination issues within our watershed when it comes to chlorides and conductivities, which are our two main parameters that we've been exploring through the Darby Creek community science work. So this map shows in the dark green, those are our normal monthly water chemistry community science locations. And then in the kind of mustardy yellow color, those are our new 19 snapshot sites. So we went out on November 7th and collected data at all of these 19 locations in one fell swoop. So we started by looking at how to collect these data points, and we wanted to select sites that were representative of the nested watersheds within Darby Creek. So our sample location is in the Berwyn and Villanova area. So it's in the most northwestern portion of the Darby Creek watershed. So we looked at Google Maps, and this area has a ton of tiny roads, a ton of little communities, and lots of bridges and stream crossings. So to try and get the most bang for our buck, we picked every road crossing that existed within our identified geography, not every single one, but most of them. And then we created a map and identified 30 potential sites to capture in the snapshot. But then when we went out and visited the locations, we assessed them for safety to access the stream, safety for parking. I don't know if you've ever driven along the main line, but there are a lot of tiny, narrow roads with no shoulders, making pulling off and parking a kind of risky maneuver. And we also wanted to assess to make sure there was enough flow to collect a grab sample. So we were able to cut our 30 sites down to 19. And these are all 19 public locations. And it worked out very conveniently that our 19 sites split naturally into two clusters. So we have our north cluster, which is noted in dark green, and our south cluster, which is noted in a light green. And we created a Google map, which we thought would be a fairly familiar user interface for our volunteers, and it's highly adaptable. So we created data points for each of our sample sites, which included the lat long, the site ID that we had assigned. We were able to upload pictures and specific instructions on how to access the site. And if there were parking areas that were either for multiple sites or there was a bit of a walk, we tried to note those as well. And then this purple dot up here was, this is the location of the Upper Mainline YMCA. So that was our home base. So we made it a little purple home icon. So there were some pluses to using Google Maps in this way. It was accessible, but the minus really was that we didn't roll it out in time to get everyone familiar with it. So I think in the future, we'll probably give it a shot again, but adjust how we roll out using this with our volunteers. So once we had our sites identified, we had the opportunity to go out the day before the sampling period and put flags out at all the locations. This was a recommendation that we had heard from another group who had been doing this work, the snapshot style data collection. So we put fluorescent orange flagging as close as we could to each of the sample locations, and then noted on the flag the site ID. So if any of you have ever come to any tree planting event that I've been part of, we play match the flag to the tag. It's one of my favorite games. And so we did the same thing. We wanted all of our volunteers to feel confident that they were at the right location when they were collecting their data. And then the final data point, whenever they went out to a site, was collecting that tag to bring it back. So we put this out as late as possible in the process because we did not want folks to think that this was litter or to take it down if it had been up for a while. And we did lose one site at a very public location at a very popular spot along the stream. Someone did take that tag down, but that was the only tag that was lost, and all others were recovered after the sampling event. So then it was the fun part. We assembled our team. So we were so fortunate to be able to work with our all-star volunteers. We have Charlie Coulter, who's on the call, Deirdre Gordon and Lloyd Cole, who are matching in their blue check shirts, and then Dale Weaver. So these 4 volunteers have been volunteering in the Darby Creek Community Science Monitoring Program the longest, and they also have been collecting total suspended solids grab samples for us. We have 5 sites that every month they collect TSS data. So they were already familiar with the process of collecting a grab sample, going through triple rinsing and all the QC that goes along with it. So it was really fun to have them jump right into the fray with our Blitz Day. I also want to really celebrate Michelle Lampley, who's right in the middle in the striped shirt. She was the person we were working with at the Upper Main Line Y and provided a lot of site support for this work. And all the way on the right is Aurora, who's been absolutely phenomenal throughout this whole process from top to bottom. So we had an amazing team, and all we had to do was break out and go to our assigned locations. So Charlie and Dale were assigned to our north cluster, and Deirdre and Lloyd were assigned to our south cluster, while Anna, Aurora, Michelle, and I stayed at the Upper Main Line Y. So we had gotten together at about 9. We calibrated our Hotch conductivity meter, and then everyone went out once they had their supplies. So they had their data sheets, they had pre-labeled grab sample bottles. They're 125 ml little bottles. And at every site, they filled that bottle. They noted the time the bottle was filled. They got their conductivity and temperature data. Our conductivity meters do conductivity and temperature together. So rather than try and do conductivity again when they're back at the lab, we just had them collect both data points in the field. They collected some of the qualitative data analysis as well, and site images. So it was a lot of fun. We did ask them to come back by 11:30, so we would have time together to go over all of the data. So we had assigned 10 and 9 sites per pair of volunteers. And this was done kind of to see how much we could do in 2 hours. So not everyone finished their sites, but we did learn a lot about what was possible in the time period, because this was a pilot for us. And we were trying to learn as much about the study design and successful application of this Blitz in our program area, as we were curious about the kind of data that was coming directly from the water chemistry. So at 11:30, everyone came back, and together we analyzed our chlorides using Quantab strips, and we did our pH readings as well. And then we were able to use this awesome map that Aurora brought to put all of the data in real time on the map. So this is a very low tech solution, but what's awesome is that Anna, who's going to take over now, is excellent in the world of GIS and R, and was able to whip up some amazing data visualization.
Cool. Thanks, Lauren. So we'll move on to some of our actual data, which I know is everybody's favorite part. So the 2 main measurements that we are focusing on were their specific conductivity and chloride concentration. And so just a quick review. Specific conductivity reflects how well water can conduct electricity. Pure water is a terrible conductor. You have a super low conductivity. But once you start adding ions like chlorides, mainly chlorides, and fertilizers, you see that specific conductivity go up. So it's a great generalized measurement that can indicate pollution in different waterways, but it can't tell you what's going on, which is why we paired it with the quantad strips to start to look at salt concentration. And so what we found is that there's a pretty big range in both specific conductivity and chloride concentration. The conductivity ranged from about 325 to 967 microsiemens per centimeter, which is a large range. And then chloride concentration, similar, was about a 6-fold difference between the lowest and the highest sites, so 34 to 225 parts per million. And just to put that into some regulatory context, we only had we didn't have any sites that exceeded the EPA recommended limit of 230 parts per million. We had 7 sites that exceeded Canada's chronic pollution standard of 120 parts per million. And then we only had 2 sites that were below kind of the recommended threshold of 50 parts per million. So we saw pretty low level salt pollution in all of the tributaries, but nothing was wildly terrible, which is great. And we saw a really strong relationship between chloride concentration and specific conductivity, which has been reported by a lot of other groups across all sorts of watersheds. So it's really nice to be able to see that trend in these local waterways. There were 2 sites that you can see are a little bit outside of the trend line. One of them has lower conductivity than you would expect for the chloride concentration. One of them has higher conductivity than you would expect for the chloride concentration. So those are 2 sites that we might start studying more regularly just to get a sense of why they don't quite fit in with the expected pattern. And so one of the really nice things about this study was that we could select small first order tributaries that only drain about 1 to 2 kilometers of land. So we could really kind of dig into local land use and see how small scale changes are impacting water quality in these tributaries. And so across the sites that we selected, the impervious surface cover in the catchment that surrounds the site and drains into it ranged from 6% at our lowest site to 39% at our highest site. And this map is kind of a spatial visualization of where all of our sites were located, and then the relationship between impervious surface cover and chloride concentration. So the darker red the dot is, the higher the chloride concentration, and the larger the dot is, the more impervious surface cover. So it's really interesting because you can start to see differences in sites that are right next to each other. So for example, right up here, we have DCBR1 and DCBR2. These are 2 sites that are directly across the road from one another, but they're on 2 separate tributaries. And you could really see that there are significant differences in water quality between these 2 sites, where we have much lower chloride concentration at DCBR2, which has about 20% impervious surface cover and drains residential areas and woodland areas, versus a much higher chloride concentration, about 225 parts per million at DCBR1, which drains the Route 30 corridor and originates near a SEPTA train station. So it's just really nice to be able to see how those fine scale differences in local land use directly impact water quality. And we do see 2 sites that were pretty nice. There's DCTR1 here, which is on Thomas Run, has low impervious surface cover, relatively low chloride concentration, and DCWR1, which is similar. So we often think of Darby Creek as a relatively impaired watershed, but it is nice to see that there's some tributaries that are doing all right. So with this data, we can also start to select more sites that we want to focus on and add on to our monthly community science program. So that's just a very general overview of our data, and we're spending a bit more time in the next couple of weeks digging into it more and seeing what other interesting things we found.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, Anna has been doing some really cool work with visualizing a lot of our data in a way that is very tangible and clear to see. So we're excited to be able to share all of this with our entire community, not just our community science volunteers, and hopefully identify opportunities for stream residents to start altering their behavior, particularly with the onset of winter, identifying opportunities to reduce salt contamination through small sustainable changes to individual behaviors, like sweeping up excess salt from sidewalks and driveways between winter storms. So hopefully we'll be continuing to share and amplify a lot of the lessons that are being learned from snapshots like this. And of the lessons learned, some really easy ones, 9 to 10 sites per pair of volunteers was way too many sites. We assumed that was going to be the case. But we were really impressed to see that for our volunteers, they got over half done, which was more than we were expecting. So we were really excited to see that. It took longer to select and scout the sites than we were first anticipating, given the small geographic area. So for the next round of snapshot, we'll likely give ourselves a much longer lead time to work within the community and amplify what we're doing within the community. And an easy one is we're going to be more prepared with that longer lead time. We'll be able to share our site map sooner and get feedback from our volunteers about access point and route development, rather than just give a list of locations and have them try to figure it out on the fly. So those are 3 easy changes that we'll be making. And I'm happy to share if you have questions about our recommendations, our contact information is at the end. But some of the wins were pairing up our volunteers was delightful, because even though we've been working for years together, they have not been working with other volunteers, just with us, the coordinators. So it was really cool to see how they were sharing their understanding of the Darby Creek watershed, the affinity that they have for their sample locations, and what they've been learning independently through this work. So that was a lot of fun. Plus, it made us feel better knowing that they were pairs. So if anything did happen in the field, they were safe and would be able to practice safe field protocol. Flagging the sites ahead of time was definitely very key. One of our volunteers said that she loved that it felt like a scavenger hunt, and she actually really liked that there were too many sites because she felt the competitive pressure to get it all done. So I appreciated hearing that. But for the future, I think we're going to try and reduce some of that competitive feel and just keep it more like a fun, lighthearted scavenger hunt. Sharing the data right away was really impactful. So we really had we spent a long time looking at the data and talking about what it means. And our volunteers were really fast to pick up and share their observations and their understanding of like the history of the watershed and why certain sites were the way they were. So that was really exciting. And I would recommend that for anyone, if you're going to be doing this in the future, being able to visualize the data right away is key. And then science with friends is just so much more fun than science by yourself. So we really have been successful with this project because of the collaborative nature. It breeds creativity and it breeds a sense of community growth. So between working with all of our incredible volunteers and teaming up with other watershed organizations, that's what's made this project so successful. So we're looking forward into the future to identify other ways to partner with other groups and how to strengthen the relationships that we've been building since 2021. And that brings us to, I think, the end of our piece. So all of our contact information is up on the screen, and we'd love to take questions if you have any. I'm going to stop sharing.
Lauren, yeah, I have a question. One thing, why had you given any thought to developing a rapid response team? In other words, once you have your pairs of volunteers, they have a bunch of sites, they know how to get there. But then when you have a stormwater event, they go out right after and get samples then based on stormwater, once they know their site. So any thoughts to what you call a rapid response to stormwater events?
Yeah, Jim, I love that. I think that's a great idea, a great suggestion. It's not something we had thought of doing, I think, explicitly yet, but it's something we could start to consider in the future. The one piece that I would just be cautious with in our study design for a rapid response team is making sure all sites are safely accessible. So many of the little streams that we're studying, these little tributaries, are really flashy and they don't have very well intact banks. So getting in and out can be a little risky. I mean, even this time of year with the wet leaves on the ground, we're slipping and sliding a little bit. So that would be the one hesitation, but I think a rapid response team could be a lot of fun.
Well, I think, yeah, as far as slipping and sliding, these are adults and they have to use common sense. And if you don't live on the edge, you're taking up too much space, right? Anyway, but yeah, obviously you have to caution them, use common sense. If there's ice on the rocks, don't step on them, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I think Anna's taking notes. So yeah, we might be talking more in the future, Jim.
Oh, only other comment, and I'll get that Mike Ballard chime in, but it sounds like the same thing that Green Valleys is doing, because we have our area, we go out and sample, and Mike can chime in on that. I think he's here.
Hi, Lauren. Looks great. Looks like you're having fun.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, so we have a sampling head that goes on Unger window cleaning poles. So it's just a matter of they can get to the creek, and the poles go all the way up to 25-foot long. So you can also sample off bridges, but yeah, safety is really important. And I'd like to remind everybody here that Jim does not think insurance is something that you need. In terms of, Jim likes to live on the edge. We know that. I thought maybe I gave you one of those poles. That was so long ago.
You gave us the adapter at the end, yeah. And so we actually have used that with some of our grab samples, but replicating that for our volunteer team, I think, would be a really smart workaround for being too close to the edge, Jim. But yeah, Mike,
Safety.
Yeah, safety that's what we have been talking about with our volunteers and all of our trainings, is that the quality of the data doesn't mean anything if you're being unsafe getting it. And that's the most key component to the work that we do, is safety first, quality of the data second. And thankfully, we don't have too many adrenaline junkies on our team. So we don't worry too much. But yeah, that grabber pole is awesome, Mike. And we do use ours with some regularity.
So the other thing, while we're here, what kind of pastry do you have for them when they get back to run the samples?
Yeah, we got donuts and we had coffee. Yeah, that was a key component.
Yeah, I want to make a comment on the Mike's grab samples, because we've done some samples, and if they all go over bridges, all these streams have bridges, you just stand on the bridge and scoop down. You don't even have to get down near the water to get the grab sample. So that's the one advantage. And in the winter, you don't have to step on ice-covered rocks. You just right from the bridge, stick it down. We've done that on a couple of our samples. That's where we got it right off the bridge. So.
The issue, because we had talked about that, creating a weighted holder for the bottles to drop down to do bridge sampling, is the size of our streams are too small. For TSS particularly, when you sample from the bridge, you're more than likely to kick up a bunch of sediment and skew the data. So that's the one reason we've been having them go down to the water, and because it's only 2-3 inches deep in most of the sites that we were looking at. So the grab sampler on a pole, I think, would work really well just to keep from kicking things up. But we are in this section of the watershed, it's not big enough to do the bridge sampling. But we're hoping to replicate this snapshot in other catchments within the watershed. So as we get further downstream, that sort of bridge sampling, I think, would be absolutely easy to do. And the bridges actually have a place to stand that you're not going to get clipped by passing motor vehicles.
Yeah, and that small stream and very, very headwater sampling, I think, can be important to identify some of the worst areas, because if you have small streams coming out of those, and you do have some of those small ones coming out of the most developed areas, this type of thing, if you can see, some folks have had success using this to get water out of, tiny streams. It doesn't address your primary issue of safety and getting down into some of these streams, but nonetheless, if you do have a stream that you can safely access, this type of thing can be helpful. And I have some of these if you need, Lauren. You seem to have a pretty good lab stock, but if you need some of these, I think we can provide some. I mean, when you get around to doing another one of these.
Yeah, maybe in the spring.
In your training program, you could train a truffle dog to go into the streams.
Oh,
Good
that would be the
investment.
dream. We have a group of beaglers around here, and it would be great to just strap some sampling equipment to the beaglers and have them collect grab samples as they go tromping through the woods.
That sounds exciting and fun.
I have a question regarding the science on this.
Yes.
What do you think is I have some ideas, but what do you think is the connection specifically between the chloride and the impervious surface? I know these are base flow measurements and they're in November. Are you beginning to think that there might be chloride in the aquifer that's runoff from salting roads or something else?
Yeah, I think our thinking on that is the impervious surface cover is kind of just a general reflection of human activity in the area. And so part of it is the buildup of road salt and soils over time, especially in areas like the Route 30 corridor, where you just have a ton of road salt applied to all those roads, all those parking lots, all those driveways that for the last 50, 60, 70 years has been building up in the soil. We're just seeing the reflection of that in both the chloride concentration and then the impervious surface cover, but it could also be there are sometimes chlorides in fertilizers. So impervious surface cover is also associated with lawns. So if you have people fertilizing their lawns and their gardens, that the impervious surface cover measurement would kind of reflect that as well. It's more of a general reflection of human activity than necessarily the surfaces specifically impacting the chloride concentration.
Yeah, and if I might follow up on that, one of the things that Lauren pointed out was that they were sampling that these snapshots are being done during base flow conditions. So that is, base flow is generally considered to be when there's no runoff coming in, and that is base flow is being supplied by groundwater. So these snapshots are intended to be a representation of groundwater contamination, really. And that seems to be occurring. It's a pretty clear pattern that is happening in direct correlation with human activity. And that is represented by any number of things. What we're talking about here is impervious surface. You could do road density, you could do, urban land use, whatever. And all those are going to be directly correlated with conductivity and chloride and a lot of other things that are associated with human activity. So conductivity and salt not only can be toxic itself, but can be indicators of a whole lot of other things. So when we're talking about salt contamination, we're not only talking about risk of biotic health because of salt itself and in relation to salt itself, but in relation to all the other things that salt is potentially kind of, a reflection of.
So yeah, I have a basic chemistry question. Fertilizer and road salt are two contaminants. Do they both cause the EC to rise? In other words, one is chloride road salt, but how about fertilizer? It's not chloride, something else, cyanic. Is that so? Basically, you wouldn't necessarily get the correlation of EC and road salt when in fact it's farmer's field and fertilizer that's causing the rise in conductivity, assuming it's not, it's a different set of chemicals that are doing it. I guess Mike could answer that question. It's basically a chemical question. In other words, we got fertilizer, nitrates, and road salt. There's Mike.
I've become really curious about the chlorides. And it looks like they used to use KCl as potash fertilizer somewhere historically. And I think that would be very interesting to see if possibly historically there were also high levels of chloride from application on agricultural fields, because that would have been the only source of potash besides things like wood ash that they could have gotten. To answer your question, Jim, it would be great to have ions, sulfate, alkalinity, chloride, nitrate, potassium, sodium, calcium, and magnesium on all of these samples. And I think that until we actually have that, I feel like it'll be a lot of guesses.
So Anna, maybe you can talk about this, but Anna pointed out a couple of sites that were a little bit departing from that real tight conductivity to chloride trend, and other things that are going to affect conductivity but don't affect but are not related to chloride are going to do that. They're going to be departures. So the Valley Creek folks, the Valley Forge Trout Unlimited folks, did a snapshot last week as well, and that Valley Creek is in a watershed that's heavily limestone influenced. So those streams that have a lot of limestone influence have a lot of ions in there that are not chloride, and so those streams are going to have higher conductivities than the same streams that have with similar chloride levels. So you're gonna depart from that tight correlation in situations where you have a variety of streams with different contributors to conductivity. Nitrate in the agricultural setting is going to contribute to conductivity. I mean, unless it's in super high levels, I don't think it's going to be real significant. Is probably in a lot of cases going to be drowned out by chloride. But there's certainly a lot of other substances that contribute to conductivity.
Yeah, and this is a question that popped up for us a couple of months ago. We have one site that was not included in the snapshot on Ithin Creek that had low chlorides but very high conductivity. And after doing some poking around, we realized that several of the tributaries just upstream of the sample site have been piped underground and drained into the stream through concrete pipes. So we were seeing an urban karst pattern that it was throwing us for a loop. We could not figure it out, but we trusted our volunteer. He was really communicating with us about what he was seeing. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. And it wasn't until we started looking at the history of that area did we realize that the watershed, the sub-watershed, had been really simplified when everything was piped underground to make way for several developments. So that question of, what is impacting conductivity if not chlorides is a really critical one, and one that you can start to really pick apart if you know your site history. And fortunately for us, our volunteer really took it upon himself to do some poking around because he lives in the area. So he was invested in trying to solve the mystery of why his data didn't match within any of the rest of the data set. And for our normal monitoring program, so in the Ridley, Crum, and Darby Creek, we do look at nutrients, alkalinity, and hardness in addition to conductivity and chlorides. And we were hoping that our single site in Darby Creek would help us to understand what was going on. But unfortunately, lack of funding to expand the data set throughout the Darby Creek is kind of limiting our dream of piecing apart kind of what's coming in from each of these little tributaries. But I would love to be able to collect a full suite of data for each of these sites every month, but I'm pretty sure I'd go bankrupt, so.
I just want to share an observation that I measured the conductivity. I didn't have a grab sample of a spring on an old farm on a high elevation in Charlestown. So, and it's not a limestone influenced area, and the conductivity was very high. It was around 450, and it would consistently be that at the source of this, where the source reached the surface every time I measured it. And someone else told me recently, and I don't remember, about another farm where they found the conductivity is really high. So one way I think about it is that there is some, like, you know, talking, Lauren, what you're saying about knowing your site, that in certain areas, the farms probably have contributed to elevated conductivity in the aquifer, in the groundwater, in the, you know, I don't know what on that. But when you see the graphs, like Trout Unlimited's graph showing the increases in salt, you know it's something beyond that legacy influence. So anyway, I put in the chat, I think a really good article by the USGS on sources of chlorides and how to pick it apart a little bit. Anyway, and for farms, for agriculture, yes, it's fertilizer. It includes the animals. Also, apparently, a lot of irrigation will raise that level. And there's another. I'm not thinking right now. So anyway, it's a good paper by them.
Carol, I don't see it in the chat.
All right, I think I meant to, let me do it again.
Yeah, Carol, you had sent it to me because we were.
Yeah, I thought I had it for everyone, but here it is now.
There you go.
Cool, thanks for sharing that, Carol.
Yeah, I was going to also comment. I know a lot of farmers, they put in tile fields to drain wet areas, and I wonder if that's a contributor, because then that goes, it sort of concentrates the water in the fields and it goes out through tile fields. And I know, you know, even if it's under an ag easement, they're allowed to put in tile fields, dig up, and then they just lay in perf pipe. I'm not sure how they're done, but I think that would tend to concentrate some of the runoff from fertilizer.
I have a question. I don't know this area. Are most of the houses septics, or they're tied in, or are they tied into a municipal sewer system?
That's a great question. I believe the majority of the houses where we were are tied into the sewer system, but I don't believe it's all of them. So there are a couple of old neighborhoods that I don't know if they've been connected yet. It's in this kind of neck of Chester County. It's sort of hit or miss, community by community, who's connected and who's not. But that's one of the issues that we had identified with our not community science monthly water chemistry, that there are a couple locations that are inexplicably have high nutrients and high conductivity, and it could be linked to a very nearby septic failure that has not been addressed. But it's hard to say without doing more detailed analysis. And you don't ever want to just go knock on a suspected leaky septic house's door and say, hey, I think you might have a problem. I think that's a good way to lose friends.
Lauren, I'm sorry if you've already answered this, but were you and your science team, were you surprised by the values that, was it, you know, the values there are not so different, I think, David and Peter Hughes. I'm not sure they're so different from what they found in Valley Creek, which is known to be very impacted. So were you surprised by how high those levels were?
Yes, I think actually what we were more surprised by was how many sites had really good values. And so that was, you know, it's nice to be delighted sometimes to see that actually chloride's not an issue everywhere, But where it is an issue, like at that DCBR2 location, that was, 900 microsiemens per centimeters, that was alarming, particularly because 9 feet away, the other stream that was feeding in just across the road was so much lower. But when we actually sat down and looked at the map and where it originated, it comes in under the SEPTA station. It's piped under the Route 30 corridor, and it's heavily impacted. It made more sense, but it was really disappointing. So I don't know in the future, if there's any way that we can work with the municipality in that location to see if there are changes that we can be made, or work with SEPTA to see if there's anything that can be done. But honestly, I think between the historic legacy contamination that comes with SEPTA locations, that the damage has been done. So trying to identify downstream remediation locations to improve that water quality before it can travel too far and do damage, where it meets these lovely little streams that are coming from woodlands and kind of low density areas. So I think to get back to the root of your question, were we surprised? I'd say a little disappointed at where we saw the contamination, not necessarily surprised, but really encouraged by the locations that we saw high value, because I think those are the stories that we should be amplifying, is even in these highly impacted watersheds that have a reputation for being unhealthy, there are areas that are really excellent, and those areas should be protected and conserved wherever possible. So that's what I feel.
Yeah, and I think just to add on, we do, through the community science program, we already have a pretty robust data set of chloride concentration and conductivity throughout a lot of Darby Creek. And these values all fit into the range that we're already seeing. So it wasn't, I don't think we saw anything too far below that what we've seen and nothing too far above. So it was just kind of nice to see that it was a fairly representative section of the larger watershed.
And I want to share one more thing. I know it's late, but New Hampshire developed a TMDL for salt in their streams going back to 2008. So they have had for many years now been developing their approaches. They're about to upgrading all of their information now. They're going to publish a BMP manual. They did a lot of measurement. I mean, they've done a lot of work, a lot of outreach. They also focused on business, commercial first. So I think we're going to invite them to one or another venue and to come and talk to one or another venue, and maybe others would be interested that we could invite to come and have the chance to talk with them. I'm really interested in learning from them about how the successes and better ways of approaching businesses about their use of salt in the winter.
Yeah, I'd be super interested in that, Carol. Being part of that discussion or learning more about the lessons that are shared during that discussion.
So make sure that we send out the notice of it.
Along that line, up near Bolton's Landing, the Lake George area, there's one community that is really addressing that with its highway department doing a pre-salting with a with a light water and
Brine.
Pardon?
A brine.
Yeah, brine. That's the word. And they've also, I guess, gotten some fancy trucks that they can really see where they're depositing it. And it was pretty interesting. It was on on the radio, one of the NPR stations upstate, and it's also printable. I can hunt for the lead on that. But I did have a question. Years ago, a lot of the old houses where I am, we're in Orange County in the Shawangunk Ridge, and a lot of old houses had, the old roofs were a big source of pollution, the roofs. And I don't know what has improved in roofing, but it was the asphalt, all of the petroleum products. You know, they put a tremendous amount of stuff into the streams. Some places we even had somebody make sure that they had created a French drain so it wasn't running off straight into the lake. And so there are ways to ameliorate it, I guess. So, but I think that used to be a big source of pollution.
Yeah, and that would, I don't know specifically about that, Grace, but that's just another, one of these cases in which it's just another substance
Ingredient,
that's
yeah.
associated with just, development and activity.
Yeah. I know we're a little over time, but I wanted to know from Lauren and Anna, the information that because it relates to what we're just beginning to do, appearing before our local planning board to give them more than a snapshot, but to orient them towards, to be aware of salts. Do you communicate, have you had any sessions with towns or hamlets or to give them a heads up as the advocacy educational component?
Yeah, that's a great question, Grace. We have been working on building relationships with all of our municipalities to really elevate this discussion, particularly, this time of year. And we have also been trying to reach our community members on an individual level too, and help them understand what the threats are so they can be advocating from within their own municipality. Because I think that a lot of the movement that comes with getting policy change, getting adjustments to, having brine trucks on the road, there's a lot more sway that comes when residents stand up and say, we're concerned about this problem.
Absolutely.
So we're trying to take both routes, advocating as a conservation organization and also educating our platform so they can advocate for their own neighborhoods. And that's where I think in a big way our volunteers have been. That was one of the surprises that we had. We were hoping to increase stream literacy and watershed literacy, and we we're fortunate to have a group of volunteers that are also becoming quite passionate in their advocacy work. So it's I think we're taking kind of as many different approaches to inspire change as possible. But we post like crazy on our blog. Our website has an active blog section, so we're constantly updating with our research. DCVA is posting in their annual publication about the salt issues in the snapshot. So we're trying to get the word out and then trying to build up the trust with our municipalities that we're not a police force and we're actually just trying to look out for everybody together. So it's a slow process working with municipalities and leadership. And by the time you build trust, the new election comes and they turn over, it seems like. But yeah, we're doing what we can in that realm without being straying into the world of lobbying, which as a nonprofit is kind of a tricky dance, but an important one.
Okay. Great discussion, everyone. So just wanted to mention again, if anyone would like to continue these questions after this meeting, go to Manage My Watershed and post it in there. Maybe we can just kind of start using that. We'll see how it goes, but please feel free to post there, whatever, questions, follow up on discussion, whatever, and we'll see how it goes. Anything else before we sign off for the day? Okay, well, thanks everyone for attending. We will see you
Great.
next month, December 15th, I believe it is. So take care. Happy holidays.
Yeah.